hard just to get him to call somebody. He like, it's too much work. Like, so happy birthday, Christian. Thank you everybody for coming and cheers.
So stuff.
27. 27. 27.
Good afternoon, everybody. So,
Your father's supporters, we here. People that support your dad. Anything you want to say?
feel like your father will get a fair trial?
Did you witness anything?
How do you support him?
The courtroom in Los Angeles fell into stunned silence when the defense unexpectedly brought up disturbing claims involving Christian Combs. Whispers turned into audible gasps as the attorney mentioned accusations that underage guests were present at what have come to be known as freak-offs. The atmosphere immediately shifted. Tension rippled through the room. Cameras clicked frantically as Christian pushed back his chair and left without a word. No glance toward the judge, no nod to his legal team. He disappeared through the exit, leaving behind a courtroom engulfed in chaos. His sudden exit wasn't about avoiding the spotlight. It was a calculated move. The moment allegations involving minors were spoken out loud, the entire narrative changed. This wasn't just another salacious headline. It was something far more sinister. In a video that quickly spread across the internet, Christian Combs spoke publicly for the first time, revealing a deeply disturbing side of life behind the red carpet. His confession painted a picture of manipulation, silence, and fear, a secret world where power silenced victims and celebrity protected predators. Speaking in a soft, heavy tone, he described growing up surrounded by fame and wealth, yet feeling powerless and unheard. From an early age, he was taught to suppress discomfort, to smile through it all, and to blend into a world where obedience was expected and resistance came with consequences. He talked about the infamous parties, not glitzy Hollywood soirees, but carefully orchestrated events that placed young people in compromising, controlled environments. These were not parties. They were performances, and he was expected to play his role, not as a guest, but as an accessory, visible, compliant, and silent. Christian's words were raw, filled with a pain that no longer wanted to be hidden. He wasn't the first to hint at the darker corners of the entertainment world, but this time, the story came with a face and a voice that couldn't be ignored. As his video exploded online, the world watched in disbelief, many finally beginning to grasp the depth of what had long been whispered behind closed doors. Sean Diddy Combs, the man at the center of the storm, has been a cultural titan, known for his music empire, his extravagant lifestyle, and his role in shaping the careers of countless artists. But according to Christian's testimony, there was another side to the empire, one built on control, silence, and manipulation. Christian's words revealed the reality of growing up under Diddy's shadow, pressured to act older, forced into adult spaces, and conditioned to stay quiet. His description of his childhood is chilling, moments no child should live through, hidden behind the glamorous facade of fame and fortune. Behind the glamour, a pattern of silence and control. What Christian described wasn't just an isolated experience or the consequence of a single bad decision. It was a system masked by flashing lights, luxury, and celebrity privilege. At the core of this world were parties that pushed every boundary imaginable. Topless women walked around like decorations. Drugs were used openly, as if laws didn't exist. Men and women engaged in acts that blurred the lines between reckless indulgence and outright danger. But this wasn't about one wild night. This was a ritual, repeated and protected by those with everything to lose if the truth got out. These weren't just parties, they were power plays. And everyone who attended, worked them, or stood by was part of something darker than the surface ever suggested. Christian spoke openly about what it felt like to be raised inside this world. As a child, he didn't understand everything, but he knew one thing. He wasn't allowed to say no. He was taught to smile, pose for the cameras, and keep his mouth shut. Speaking out wasn't bravery, it was betrayal. That was the rule. And so he stayed quiet, even when everything inside him screamed that it was wrong. This wasn't just about fame. It was about control. Control over his appearance, his reactions, his voice. Even his pain was managed, hidden behind PR teams and media distractions. What the world saw was the carefully curated image of a music dynasty. But behind the curtain, Christian was struggling to survive in a world where no one seemed willing to protect him. The courtroom reckoning and the family divide. The real shock didn't hit the public until the trial began. The accusations against Diddy weren't just tabloid fodder. They were now being tested under the scrutiny of the law. Charges of sex trafficking and racketeering painted a sinister portrait of a man who had long been celebrated as a mogul and cultural icon. The courtroom became a theater of truth. Reporters filled every seat, cameras waited outside, and every movement was documented. The atmosphere was heavy. You could feel that something bigger was at stake. This wasn't just a legal battle. It was about whether someone with immense wealth and status could finally be held accountable. And then came the moment that changed everything. As expected, Diddy's children were rumored to appear. But when the courtroom doors opened, only Justin and Christian walked in. Their faces were unreadable, but their silence was louder than any statement. Quincy, Delilah, Jesse, and Chance were all absent. For the public, that absence spoke volumes. The once tight image of a united family was unraveling right there in front of them. This wasn't just about Diddy. It was about legacy, about what happens when the truth becomes too heavy to hide behind name recognition and designer suits. Christian's decision to speak out had forced a crack in the industry's polished surface. Now, the floodwaters were rising. Perhaps the most unsettling part of Christian's story wasn't the explosive claims about the parties. It was how everything began. He described in painful detail how the manipulation didn't come all at once. It started gradually, with subtle comments, with invitations to hang around the adults, with jokes he didn't understand but was expected to laugh at anyway. He was offered drinks before he even knew what alcohol really did. He was praised for being mature and cool when he acted older than his age. Little by little, he stopped feeling like a child and started acting like a product, something to be shaped, used, and controlled. That's the terrifying truth about grooming. It doesn't look evil at first. It looks like attention, like inclusion, like privilege. But it's all a lie designed to break down defenses and blur the boundaries of what's normal. Christian recalled the people who should have intervened: bodyguards, assistants, house staff. They saw it all. They watched as he was pushed deeper into a lifestyle he never chose. But they said nothing. Whether it was fear or loyalty or self-preservation, they turned away. So he learned to play his part, smile in interviews, shake hands with celebrities, post photos with captions that hid the truth. And all the while, he was silently enduring a reality no child should ever have to face. His confession isn't just a testimony, it's a challenge. To the industry, to the fans, and to a system that has allowed silence to reign for far too long.
Check that shit and all that.
Right now he getting practice shots.
You know what I'm saying?
He getting practice shots because we got the legend in the building.
Yeah, you already know what it is, man.
Christian Combs, King, the one and only.
The deafening silence of power. One of the most haunting elements in Christian's revelation wasn't just what happened to him. It was who allowed it to happen. Behind every whispered rumor and sideways glance stood an industry built on secrets. The entertainment world, with all its glitter and acclaim, harbored a silence far louder than any headline. Executives, assistants, publicists, and insiders, they knew. They had heard the rumors. They'd seen things. And yet they did nothing. There were nods. There were jokes told in hushed tones. There were veiled warnings masked as gossip. But real action? That never came. Because to challenge someone like Diddy wasn't just risky, it was career suicide. And so, the silence prevailed. The victims were left to suffer in private while the powerful maintained their shine. This isn't about one man's misdeeds. This is about an ecosystem that breeds silence, an unspoken pact to protect the powerful and erase the voices of the vulnerable. Christian's confession didn't just crack open a case, it exposed a culture that trades truth for loyalty and morality for influence. In speaking up, he didn't just disrupt the narrative around his father. He shattered the illusion of an untouchable industry. Realizing you were abused doesn't always come in a moment. Sometimes it takes years of denial, confusion, and misplaced guilt before the truth becomes clear. For Christian, that realization was a slow and agonizing awakening. For so long, he had been part of a world that praised him, dressed him in designer clothes, and posed him for magazine covers. But behind every lens, he was hiding a growing fracture inside. He described the feeling like walking through the ruins of a house you thought was still standing. Only later do you notice the cracks had been forming all along. He didn't understand it as a child. How could he? He didn't have the tools to label what was happening. There was no language for emotional manipulation when those doing it were also the ones feeding him, clothing him, calling him family. The betrayal wasn't just in what they did, it was in who they were. The ones meant to protect him were the very architects of his silent suffering. And that's what made healing so difficult. Because how do you forgive those who smiled while you were breaking? But now, years later, Christian is speaking out, not just for himself, but for others. His voice is not just a testimony. It's an invitation for other survivors to find their words, to name their pain, to begin their healing. Because silence may have been forced upon him, but truth is something he's reclaiming. The heavy mask of fame, a son's life in the shadows. To the outside world, Diddy was the embodiment of success. His name was synonymous with luxury, innovation, and cultural influence. He had built an empire and curated a persona that commanded respect across the globe. But behind that brand was a father who dragged his children into a world they never asked for. Christian wasn't just a child. He was a prop in the show. From red carpets to VIP lounges, he was groomed not just for fame, but for silence. At first, it may have looked like a dream. Private jets, celebrity encounters, and exclusive parties. But soon, the dream twisted into something far darker. He was introduced to adult environments before he had the emotional maturity to understand them. Parties where alcohol flowed like water, where drugs weren't hidden but handed out, and where the air was thick with unspoken expectations. He didn't have a choice. The glitz came with strings, and those strings wrapped tighter the older he got. He remembers one party vividly, surrounded by half-naked women, intoxicated men, and an energy that pulsed with reckless abandon. He wasn't there to play. He was there to conform. His childhood had been exchanged for silence, his innocence for image. What the world called wild nights were, in truth, orchestrated spectacles. They weren't accidents. They were calculated environments designed to enforce loyalty, suppress dissent, and normalize exploitation. Christian wasn't the only one there, but he was one of the few willing to speak. And that's what makes his story so powerful. It peels away the fantasy of fame and shows us the raw, painful cost paid by those who are forced to grow up behind the curtain. A father's betrayal and the mechanics of grooming. Diddy's son reveals a harrowing truth. His own father, the very figure who should have protected him, was either willfully complicit or disturbingly indifferent. In that environment, survival meant silence. He learned to adapt, to play the part, to pretend it wasn't affecting him. But behind the scenes was a far more insidious force at play. Grooming doesn't always look like what people expect. It often begins long before the parties, the flashing cameras, or the pressure to perform. For Diddy's son, it started in quiet moments, when boundaries were subtly pushed, when he was encouraged to behave like an adult, when his discomfort was minimized or dismissed altogether. These moments created confusion, clouding his ability to distinguish right from wrong. He was praised for being mature, for keeping cool around celebrities, and told to accept situations that no child should ever be exposed to. It wasn't overt, it was strategic and quiet. Over time, the manipulation normalized inappropriate behavior. And while he lacked the words to describe it back then, he now recognizes the deeply rooted emotional manipulation he endured. The effects didn't end when the events did. Grooming leaves lasting scars, fractured trust, distorted ideas of relationships, and deep emotional wounds that often follow victims into adulthood. Recovery takes time, and even when victims find the strength to speak, the damage doesn't simply vanish. It remains haunting and unresolved. As his testimony unfolds, the spotlight shifts beyond just one individual. What started as a personal story now reveals a chilling suggestion, a larger, more entrenched system of abuse operating in the shadows of fame. Allegedly, Diddy was not alone. Other survivors have emerged, their stories eerily similar. What's more disturbing is the realization that many of these incidents may not have been isolated, but part of a deeply rooted network of manipulation and control. Leaked footage from Diddy's notorious parties has added fuel to the fire. The videos, according to insiders, don't just show excessive partying. They depict interactions between high-profile celebrities and vulnerable individuals that many now describe as deeply unsettling. These weren't fringe figures. They were household names, media darlings, celebrated icons of music and film. Behind their glamorous public personas, some of these individuals allegedly participated in or turned a blind eye to exploitative behavior. It's a stark contrast, public adoration on one side, and, on the other, a hidden world of silence, power, and control. What makes these revelations even more painful is the realization that this isn't a new story. Others have sounded the alarm before. Former child stars like Orlando Brown have spoken publicly for years about abuse within the industry, only to be dismissed as unstable or unreliable. But with each new testimony, those past warnings gain new weight. In light of Diddy's son's story, earlier claims are being re-examined. What was once seen as the rant of a troubled actor now appears to have been an early cry for help, one that was tragically ignored. As the entertainment world grapples with these unfolding allegations, it's becoming harder to deny what many have long suspected. This may be bigger than one man. It may be an industry reckoning long overdue.
Was upgraded from my last whore. On Risha, Keisha, and Joy. And I ain't tripping if you dip it and Joy.
Shut and Mike.
I was locked 23 and 1.
And 1.
Now I ball like 23
And 1. And 1.
A culture of silence. Orlando Brown and the systemic problem. Orlando Brown's long-standing claims about manipulation and abuse within Hollywood eerily echo the testimony of Diddy's son. Though the names and details differ, the underlying themes remain chillingly consistent. Young talents exploited, silenced, and ultimately discarded by the very people they trusted. These parallel stories suggest that what we're witnessing isn't a series of isolated events. It's a reflection of a deeply rooted, systemic problem that has flourished in the shadows for years. The pattern is clear. Those in power have consistently taken advantage of those beneath them, shielded by a culture that rewards silence and punishes truth. This is no longer just a story about Diddy. It's about a long-standing industry structure that has enabled exploitation to thrive unchecked. Hollywood has long been cloaked in glamour and mystique, but behind the scenes, a culture of fear has silenced victims for decades. Emotional, physical, and even sexual abuse have reportedly been buried beneath layers of legal threats, intimidation, and non-disclosure agreements. These NDAs, originally intended to protect privacy, have often been weaponized to suppress truth and shield the powerful from consequences. In his emotional confession, Diddy's son revealed how this very culture kept him silent. For years, he didn't even realize what he had experienced was abuse, an all-too-common reality for survivors. It wasn't until he began to process his trauma that he recognized how deeply the manipulation ran. Speaking out meant confronting not just his abuser, but the entire system that allowed it to happen. And the stakes were high. Figures like Diddy wield enormous influence, with many careers hanging in the balance. For aspiring artists, speaking out could mean losing everything: their work, their reputation, even their safety. This fear has silenced countless voices over the years. But now those voices are beginning to rise. At the heart of the ongoing investigation is a startling discovery: a set of flash drives allegedly handed over to a man named Courtney Burgess before the untimely death of Kim Porter, Diddy's former partner. According to Burgess, Kim entrusted him with 11 drives containing sensitive footage from private gatherings attended by high-profile individuals in the entertainment world. These drives have since been turned over to a grand jury and are under FBI review. If the claims are accurate, the contents are both disturbing and damning. Reports suggest that the footage includes scenes of celebrities engaging in troubling behavior, often involving individuals who appear to be intoxicated or in a vulnerable state, raising serious concerns about consent and legality. Some footage reportedly includes people being filmed without their knowledge, and in several instances, individuals seem visibly uncomfortable or unconsenting. The implications of this material, if verified, are staggering. While the names of those involved have not been officially released, whispers across the industry point to well-known actors, musicians, and executives. The fear of public exposure has sent shockwaves through Hollywood as the industry braces for potential fallout. One of the most pressing questions surrounding these allegations is simple: why did no one come forward earlier? The answer lies in fear. Fear of retaliation. Fear of being discredited. Fear of losing a career that took years to build. For many, the risk of speaking out felt greater than the pain of staying silent. But as more survivors begin to share their experiences, the wall of silence is finally starting to crack. The stories, once buried by power and privilege, are beginning to emerge. And with each new voice, the system that allowed this abuse to persist is being brought closer to accountability. A culture of silence begins to break. In the case of Diddy's son, the silence wasn't just rooted in fear. It was tied to deep emotional loyalty and love for his father. The manipulation ran so deep, that even in the face of harm, speaking out felt impossible. This emotional conflict is something many survivors share. Others, like Joy Dickerson and Nayo, have come forward with similar stories, alleging that Diddy's behavior was part of a broader system of abuse involving coercion, blackmail, and exploitation. Joy Dickerson's civil lawsuit, filed under New York Survivors Act, contains serious allegations. She claims that she was assaulted by Diddy in 1991, and that the incident was recorded and shared with others without her consent. These deeply violating acts often leave survivors struggling with long-term psychological wounds, isolated from support, and trapped in silence for years. Cassie Ventura's alarming accusations. Another prominent voice in this reckoning is singer Cassie Ventura, Diddy's former partner. One particularly shocking claim recounts an incident in 2012 when Diddy allegedly threatened to detonate a car belonging to rapper Kid Cudi. According to Cassie, Diddy's control permeated every part of her life. The lawsuit describes moments where she had to hide out in hotels, waiting for visible bruises to fade. Cassie also claims that Diddy forced her to handle his firearms, a move she believes was meant to intimidate and maintain dominance. These allegations portray a pattern of behavior built on power, fear, and manipulation, tactics allegedly used to control and silence those close to him. As the investigation into Diddy's actions gains momentum, it has begun to cast a wider net across the entertainment industry. New allegations have emerged from Rodney Lil Rod Jones, a producer who collaborated with Diddy on his 2022 album. In his lawsuit, Lil Rod accuses Diddy of inappropriate and non-consensual behavior, including sexual assault and coercion. Even more troubling, the lawsuit alleges that Diddy and his associates tried to involve him in a sex trafficking operation. If proven true, these claims would suggest a larger and more disturbing pattern, one where power is abused and boundaries are systematically violated. Lil Rod's account highlights the ways in which those lower in the hierarchy are pressured, isolated, and left without safe avenues for justice. A turning point for the industry. With each new voice, the silence that has long shielded Hollywood's most powerful figures is beginning to crack. The growing number of lawsuits, testimonies, and investigations has forced the industry to reckon with its history and its complicity. The critical questions are now impossible to avoid. How deep do these problems go? How many more victims remain unheard? And will true accountability finally be possible, even for the most powerful? While it's too early to predict the full consequences, one thing is clear: the survivors are no longer alone. Their stories are being heard, and the world is paying attention. Whether the industry will follow through with meaningful change remains uncertain, but the call for justice is louder than ever before.